What is going on? We are talking about the 4-liter Jeep engine. So the 4-liter is not known for its power. It is a fairly torquey engine, but what it's really known for is its reliability. Now, the modern 4-liter actually launched in Jeep in '87. Now, this engine came from AMC. They actually launched it in '86, I believe. Chrysler acquired AMC '87, continued this engine on, and ran it all the way till 2006. What we've got here is a 2004 Wrangler with the 4-liter. I think a pretty good comparison for us Ford guys is the 4.9 straight 6. Wasn't a powerhouse, but lasted forever. Same thing with the 4-liter inline 6 in the Jeep. We're going to cover the most common problems with these engines. The first one, exhaust leaks. This specific Jeep actually has one. Imagine that. It's super common on these engines. We're going to talk about it a little bit. So one of the interesting things on this engine is actually we've got our intake manifold here and our exhaust manifold all come off the same side of the head, which is pretty unique. You know, most engines you have intake one side, exhaust on the other. And as you can see, here's our exhaust manifold, here's our intake manifold. So it kind of goes every other one. Got an exhaust, an intake, exhaust, intake. It actually uses the same gasket for the intake and the exhaust. Now on the earlier 4.0 engines, the manifold was known to crack. That's the most common place for an exhaust leak. Now in 2000, they changed it up. So previous to that, all 6 cylinders were a single manifold. Now some of the aftermarket companies have come out with things to fix that. They put little flex pipes in there and everything. But in 2000, they actually broke it into 2. So this technically has 2 exhaust manifolds. Front 3 cylinders, back 3 cylinders. And if we look down here, you can see where both of those connect. So the exhaust leak on this one is actually where the catalytic converters bolt to the manifold. Those bolts are loose. So it's not an actual cracked manifold. On the later ones, the exhaust leak is not near as big of a problem because you don't necessarily have to replace the entire manifold. A lot of times it's actually just, like I said, where the manifold bolts to the catalytic converters. Now, if you don't know what an exhaust leak sounds like, it's kind of a ticking sound. We'll see if you can hear it in this one. It's always going to be worse when it's cold. If you listen carefully, you can kind of hear that tick. A lot of times, this is going to improve as the vehicle heats up, and as those parts expand a little bit, they take up some of that space where the exhaust is actually leaking out of. So when we come under the vehicle, like I said, on this one specifically, it's where the catalytic converters bolt to that manifold. You can see there's actually some movement in this one because those bolts up top are loose. Of course, the problem is they're usually seized and they're going to need replaced. You usually can't get away with just tightening them. You can always start there. But once again, I'm probably going to have to cut those out and replace them on this one. Before we move on to the next issue, I just want to come out and say, of course, there are 1,000 other things that could be wrong with a 4-liter engine. These are just the most common things in my experience. The next thing on the list is oil leaks. Now, of course, there's a lot of different places that you can get oil leaks. But the most common, we're going to start with the PCV valves, the breather valves out of the top of the valve cover. They have these rubber grommets on either side of them. Now, it's very common. That thing gets hot, cold. The rubber becomes brittle, shrinks up. You end up with a little bit of a leakage around these. Easy fix. You pop these things out, put some new grommets on, snap it back together, no problem. The other place on these engines that's pretty notorious is the valve cover. If you look, being a straight 6 engine, just how massive this valve cover is. There's a lot of real estate there that can leak. They can get, leaks onto the intake exhaust side, and also get it over here onto the spark plug and the coils. So once again, not a huge issue, but just something to look out for. Now we were back under the Jeep. The next common place, probably the most common on these engines, is a rear main leak. So basically where the engine mounts up to the transmission here, you'll see oil. So this one's got just a little bit of a seepage. Sometimes you'll get an oil pan that'll leak somewhere around it as well, but that rear main is the most common place. So now we're looking up. Here's our drain plug. Once again, in between the transmission and the oil pan is where you'll see this leak. Now, luckily on the 4-liter engine, this can be repaired without pulling the transmission. A lot of vehicles require you to pull the tranny out to be able to get to the rear main. These have a 2-piece rear main, so we can just pull off the oil pan, the back bearing cap, and get to the rear main seal if that's what we needed to do. Once again though, being a straight 6, you can just see how much real estate that oil pan takes up. So there's going to be a gasket all the way around it. Once again, it's just a place that can leak. Number 3 on our list, overheating. This engine is fairly notorious for overheating. A lot of different things that cause it, anything from low coolant level, thermostats, water pumps, things like that. The difference with this engine is this engine runs a lot hotter than most anything else. Most everyone is used to, their car running 170, 180, maybe even 190 degrees. The 4-liter, it actually runs at 210. That's its normal range. So we look at our gauge here, right dead center is 210. So once again, it just runs hotter normally. Now 210 is not overheating. If it starts to climb above 210, you definitely need to be worried. These engines are also equipped with a fan clutch. So it's not electronic fans or anything like the new ones. So that could also be a reason for your overheating, especially if it overheats a lot in slow traffic or when it's setting idling, but it does okay on the highway. That's a good indication that maybe you've got an issue with the fan. The final thing on my list is actually a crank no start. Now, this is another one of those scenarios that there's a lot of different things that can cause this, but there's a few unique things about the 4-liter that I've seen in the past. One of the strange things that happens on this 4-liter is you'll get a crank no start. Once again, that could be fuel, it could be spark, it could be any number of things, but the crank position sensor on these is a known problem. Now, the crank position sensor is on the passenger side on these with an automatic transmission. Now, manual transmission is different, but if we look right up here, we can see that 3-wire plug. That is the crank position sensor. There was actually a recall on this back in the day. I believe it was like 99 through 04, somewhere in that range, that were affected to replace the crank position sensor for a crank no start condition. Now I'll throw that number for that recall down in the description. If you throw that in Google and look it up, there's actually a pinpoint test that kind of walks you through how to test to see if your crank position sensor is just one of the common things that happens on these. On a crank no start, there's a lot of different things that it could actually be. If you're not familiar with diagnosing vehicles, then you should probably just take it somewhere, have somebody help you that is familiar with that, because these things have lots of other issues as well. Like I said a couple different times, but fuel pressure, not having spark, whether it be coil related. These also have any of the 5-volt reference sensors in these. Throttle position sensor, crank position sensor. I believe these have a cam position sensor. They're all 5-volt reference. And if you have one of those that goes bad and basically grounds out that 5 volts, it can wreak all kinds of havoc. You can have all kinds of issues that don't seem related to that sensor, all because they're basically just killing that 5-volt reference. These things are also kind of known for having PCM issues. So once again, if you're not familiar with these things, just have somebody that is look at it. So that's my list of the most common things that go wrong with the 4-liter Jeep engine. Throw down in the comments what you guys have run into on these. Is there something that I missed that's really common that a lot of you guys see out in the field? Just let me know. And until then, see you guys next time.